Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Nathaniel Mellor.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And if this is your first time, welcome to the episode. Welcome to the channel. Welcome
Hello.
to the podcast.
Welcome.
And yeah, so we're going to pretty much jump straight into today's episode, but I do want to first just say thank you to everybody who's been following us, who has been listening, who has been sharing it with your friends, who's been telling people, who's been donating. Thank you all so much for that. It really does mean a lot to us. We really appreciate your help. Honestly, thank you so much. It's a community effort, genuinely. So we really appreciate all of the help from the community. If you'd like to check out our website, we have a website called onlyabag.com. It has some articles. Thank you, by the way, to those of you who have pointed out when something is broken, like a link doesn't go where it should. We're also having some issues with Wix, I think, or something where...
Yeah, Wix, who hosts our website, seemed to have an issue recently. So a lot of our pages weren't listed and they kind of disappeared for a minute. So if you happen to notice an issue, please let us know. We're doing our best to fix all of that. Yeah,
exactly. We also have an Instagram at Only a Bag Podcast. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, you can always reach out there and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Last but not least, if you'd like to donate, if you really like the channel and you want to support us financially and you really want us to get better mics, we also want to get better mics, you can donate. We have a coffee, ko-fi.com/onlyabag. It's spelled funky, but it's pronounced coffee. And I think that is everything. We're just going to go ahead and jump straight on in. Darcy is spearheading today's episode called Honest Downsides of Living in Italy.
Unfortunate realities of being a woman.
And here we go.
Unfortunate realities for women. Workshopping it. I also want to say this is, number one, going to be a very serious episode. And also, quickly, we've been having some trouble with our mics. So hopefully we sound okay. And we're doing our best to be upbeat but appropriate. We're just we're a little all over the place because the mics and the episode topic, and it's a lot. So
we've restarted this episode like no fewer than 10 times because all of a sudden the mic cuts out or it gets all staticky. So it's been a I wouldn't say it's been a morning, but we're now well into the afternoon.
It's been a time. So because this episode is so serious, I'm going to let you know we're right off the top, we're going to be talking about lots of things, mostly related to women. However, everybody should listen. Hello, welcome. I hope you're listening. If this is too serious, though, please go on back to some other episodes and listen to some fun stuff. Today we're going to be talking about women in the workplace, assault, femicide. We're also going to be talking about abortion and IVF and touching a little bit on what it is like to be in the LGBTQIA plus community in Italy.
Also, just as a general sort of, I think healthcare, not necessarily healthcare as a woman, but just the sort of potentially sometimes difficulty of receiving healthcare, specifically as a woman.
Absolutely. And I'm going to do my best to give trigger warnings where I feel they are needed so that you can skip ahead if you're just not in a good place to listen to that part of the episode.
Yeah.
All right. You ready?
Something like that.
Yeah. I think we're both feeling trepidatious. It's heavy stuff to talk about, but it's important.
Well, especially because I think a lot of it is, and I think maybe if I may, one of the reasons we are talking about this is because, and we talked about this in the last episode, The Honest Downsides of Living in Italy, and that was somehow lighter than this. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason we do is though we have so many episodes on how to live in Italy. Like, how do you come here? How do you live? How do you establish yourself? We have articles on it. We have articles on finding visa, becoming a student, buying a house, things like that. And it does seem very, I don't know, it just seems almost like a bait and switch, or maybe like we're kind of selling a false bag of goods or something.
Like only telling you the good parts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not being like, and I think part of it is because it's so easy to look at Italy and be like, oh, that's just another, like a westernized country. That's with really no problems, without realizing that, as we've even talked about in The Honest Downsides of Living in Italy Part 1, we're only 70 years removed from fascism. I mean, and even then it's not like 70 long years, but 70 very short, very murky years. And there's been, and as we'll find out in today's episode, there's just a lot of things in which you're like, that happened that recently in Italy. So a part of this is just simply, and I think if I may, one last thing, the man's talking. This is a lovely beginning to the episode on women. No, I just also want to say that if you are visiting here, I see all this question a lot on Reddit, which is one of the reasons I'm bringing it up. It's like, I'm reading that people are, it's there's more sexual assault, there's more attacks, et cetera, et cetera. I will say Italy, by and large, is a pretty safe country. Like,
yes,
honestly, far safer than the United States, just per capita, by example. There's far less crime, there's far less assaults, there's far less a lot of things, especially aggravated assault. And so it is a much safer country. And the reason you hear about certain things in the news is because it's like, wow, that's...
Because it's a rarity.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in Rome 2 or 3 years ago, there was 3 murders happen in the space of a week. And that was like mind-boggling amount of murders happen in a week in Rome versus like, I mean, where we are, it's like, it feels like a murder every day or every couple days.
Back in the States.
Sorry, in the States. Yeah. It's like not unsurprising for a lot of murder to happen. Right. So it's a little bit of one of those things where I think it is because it's strange is when they talk about it. So I wanted to kind of put this into context in terms of if you're just listening as a tourist, you're like, oh, I'm interested.
That's the thing. I think if you're listening as a tourist and if you've looked up, because a lot of people are concerned, do I need to be fearful on my vacation? There's a lot of information of people's personal experience, which can often be very harrowing and scary. And some people have had bad experiences like on public transportation and things like that. So 100% we want to acknowledge their experience. And it's also important to know that Italy is by and large, as you said, a safer country.
Yes.
However, but in addition to that, when you're living here, as when you're living anywhere, it's a slightly different story. When you're a tourist, you're in a different space than when you're cohabitating with someone or going to work or, all of that. So we're going to focus more on the living part.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Perfect. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So one of the big reasons, jumping right into this, trigger warning for femicide. This is not a true crime podcast. We're not going to get into any specifics. We're mostly going to be talking about statistics, but just trigger warning for this section. We're going to be talking about assault and murder. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this, or we both wanted to talk about this, because it's, like Nathaniel said, very important to us to tell all of you the realities and also acknowledge the, plight of women. That's a horrible, but kind of not a good way to say it.
No, but like realities, I think is what you used.
Exactly. The realities of what it is to be a woman in Italy. So, but one of the other reasons I wanted to talk about this was because there were 2 women who were recently murdered in March in a very close time span to each other, but they were not related. They did not know each other. And because of these 2 women, it's become, obviously feminist groups and women's organizations have been talking about assault and murder, femicide for years and years and years and years. But now it seems more that it's a part of the regular public conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So again, we're not going to get into the cases of these 2 women, but just to honor them, I do want to say their names. So Ilaria Sula was murdered on March 25th by her ex-boyfriend near Rome, and Sara Campanella was murdered on March 31st in Messina, Sicily by a fellow student who I believe was also stalking her.
Yeah.
I also want to say we're going to get into this, but if you're experiencing this in Italy, you can call the police. You can also call the number 1522. That is essentially a hotline, would you say?
Yeah.
For stalking, assault, all of that. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to list just a few organizations and places you can reach out if you're experiencing any of the things we talk about in this episode.
It's also, I would say 1522 it's multilingual. So if you don't speak Italian, they do speak English as well as a handful of other languages. And you can always, if you are not Italian, you can always go to your embassy, even if you're living in Italy and you're just like, you need to go to somebody that's potentially maybe more powerful than the police in a certain sense.
And maybe able to do things more expeditiously.
Exactly. You can always go to your embassy. So that is just, again, 2 other resources in case something happens. And that obviously goes for, you can always go to the embassy for anything in case you're listening. And that's
good to know, because whenever I came here, just quick note, on the first time, my dad, who has worked for various government things in the U.S., was like, make sure you register with the embassy, know where the embassy is. And I was like, they're very businessy government. Like, they're not going to be able to help me with anything, but you really can go to them if you need help.
Ideally.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes, exactly. So let's say a statistic.
Perfect.
Just go straight into it. So in 2023, 117 women were killed. 94% of those women who were killed by Italians. And I'm saying that we're being specific about that because the current government in power, Georgia Maloney's government, has a lot of rhetoric, shall we say, accusing assaults, especially on women, and violent crime, accusing immigrants of those crimes. There has also been incorrect information put out into the, I don't know, ether, people are saying, accusing immigrants, basically saying that there is a correlation between an increase in immigrants moving to Italy. There's a correlation between that and violent crime. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Which I just want to throw out is obviously not
inaccurate.
Yes.
That is not true. That is lies that people are telling, not to be too harsh on political stuff, but that's not true. If you actually look at the real data, that is inaccurate. So of these 117 women who were killed in 2023, which is the most recent data we could find, 94% of those women were killed by Italians, and 74% of those women were killed by someone who they know, which is often how it goes. And just for reference, so 117 women were killed, but 217 men were killed.
Yeah.
So more often men are killed than women, but we're going to be focusing on women because often women are killed because of their gender.
And I think that is a big important discretion. That makes sense right? To understand the difference. I say that too because I know that a couple years ago I just mentioned in Rome there was a couple killings. I think 2 of the 3 were drug/gang related, and in the sense I think one was a drive-by on a motorcycle targeted to somebody else. So it tends to be that men who are murdered, it's not because they're men, but it's because their occupation, if that makes sense, or it's because of something specific to again, I will say Italy, just like anywhere else in the world, a lot of murder tends to be targeted on somebody. Right. It's somebody you know. It's not going to be
random
randomized.
acts of violence.
And again, this is just I want to say this specifically for those of you listening who are I'm just going to be a tourist there. I have no interest in ever moving there. The rate of murder on people that are tourists like that are so incredibly low. It's not never, but it's not it's the fear is pickpockets. The fear is getting hit by a bus maybe because somebody's texting on their phone or something. It's not getting murdered in the streets of Italy. And again, I only say that too because Italians will tell each other when you're going to the States, don't wear rings, don't wear jewelry, don't wear necklaces. You might get murdered and somebody might steal that. It's a big thing here that when you go to the States, be careful. So I just want to put that in
just
context.
As a note, as someone, both of us were mugged at gunpoint in the U.S., to be very clear, that has not happened to us in Italy. It is very obviously scary to hear stories of people being pickpocketed and robbed, but it's also important to know that just as terrifying as that is, there is very rarely a violent part to that crime.
Yes,
there's very rarely a weapon involved. Does that make sense?
Okay. And again, I think because we talked about that before, and again, when it is news, and it's obviously you should report it for sure. It's just, and again, I guess I'm making clear too, I don't anyone listening think oh, they're saying it never happens. We are not saying it never happens.
Right.
It does happen. Of course it happens. People are people, and some people are just the worst. And I just don't want, especially coming from the States, I think my own headspace was always it's going to be safer. And it is. It's just then the crimes you hear about are very different crimes than the crimes you hear about in the States, if that makes sense.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing to mention.
Because I've never heard about, I guess pickpocket's not really a thing in the States, but mugging is a huge thing in the States.
Exactly.
So I was oh, I guess they just steal your stuff and they ask for you rather than not asking for you. Well,
not asking for you?
Well, not asking for it.
Yeah.
Pickpocketing, don't ask, they just take it. But I'm I guess technically if you're getting mugged, it's more of a, please hand your stuff over.
Yeah.
Well, there's no please, just hand your stuff over.
Right.
Okay.
So that was good. I'm glad we made that distinction. All right, another statistic, which is a hard word to say. I also want to be clear, neither of us want to make any of these victims a part of a statistic, but
Correct.
Because we want to make things not just anecdotal, I want to bring you guys some numbers.
And also just put things in, again, I think in perspective, exactly.
Absolutely. So in 2022, 26,000 women sought help at an anti-violence center, which is also cool to know that anti-violence centers exist.
Yeah.
And for 40% of those women who sought help, which is, I think, counseling and also a safe shelter and various different things, for 40% of those people, they had been abused for about 5 years. The first incident of violence had happened 5 years ago, and they hadn't reported it until 2022.
Or, yeah.
Until 5 years after the first incident.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is to say that just like many other countries, underreporting is a thing, or non-reporting is a thing, where people feel like they either are unsafe to report or it's shameful to report. So again, these numbers are a bit muddy because people don't always say when they've encountered violence.
For sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And while it's not totally related in the sense that it's not related at all to violence against women, but I will say like that, like if you are pickpocketed or something stolen and you go to the police, sometimes people have had the experience where the police are almost unencouraging or discouraging. There we go. Found the word. Them from filing a report because it's work on the police officer. It's work on you. Cause they're basically, you'll get the thing of like, you don't really want to come back here, do you? You have to come back for the court case. You're going to fly all the way back here. Even if we find it's blah, 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 blah. And a part of it is too, this is specifically for pickpocketing. Sometimes the police don't understand that like to file an insurance claim, you need a police report. So it's like, it's not about whether or not I'm coming back for the court case. It's about my insurance isn't going to give me the money until, for like my luggage being stolen or whatever it is until
I have documentation.
Exactly. So I only say this too, cause like you could absolutely push back. If you have been pickpocketed or if you've been something stolen, even if it's at your hotel room, whatever it is, or if on the street, somebody snatched your bag and ran away with it, absolutely file a police report. And if they're saying you don't need to, or if it's not really that important, no, ignore them. File the police report. Just, doesn't matter if it makes the cops' life harder. It's like, no, come on. What are you here for? This is literally take the report, please. So I do say that because there's a bit of a discouragement, and I think we're not talking about it just yet, but I just wanted to point out very fascinatingly on sexual assault as a small trigger warning on the fact, but you just talked about reporting, and even the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK put together a report for British citizens coming to Italy. And it was all on, basically it was guidance for victims of sexual assault in Italy, essentially.
Oh, interesting.
And and the reason I mentioned this is one of their things was if you want to report the incident to the police, not when you want to report the incident to the police.
Wow. So what interesting wording.
And I thought that was, and again, I know that as you mentioned before, it was a specific, like not everybody reports, and there's a lot of reasons for not reporting, but it's fascinating to me that even a governmental organization isn't saying, report this, and here's how you do it.
Yeah,
and leaving it in your hand not to, but it's saying if you want to report it. And I'm like, that is such soft language.
I wonder why that language was chosen.
Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case. And again, there is a. If you're imagining that there is there's a weird push against me reporting certain things, you're not imagining it. It very much exists. There is absolutely a culture of not. And I think I don't know. I don't know enough to talk about other countries. So this is from the UK office. I don't know if America has anything written up on this. I know that even like the Canadians website has a little blurb about like, stay safe. And if you have an issue, call this number. But there in Italy specifically, as we'll get into, there is definitely a culture of not reporting, of shame, of, if you've been assaulted against, then that is your problem kind of thing. And just whether it's sexual or not, it's just like, you must have done something. And it's like, oh, this is bad.
Right. That's the commonly held belief.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important that we talk about at the end of the episode some organizations you can reach out to, because if you don't feel comfortable reporting on your own, there are organizations that will help you through that process and work with you.
That's actually good to know. Yeah, that's fantastic. So,
since we're talking about it, misogyny, strongly and deeply held belief in misogyny, is that a thing? It's just an undercurrent.
Yeah, I think it's just more of an ingrained societal, mannerism more than just like the way people
mannerism.
Hilarious. No, but if it's not people actively believing in it, it's definitely just shaped the way that people associate with one another.
Absolutely. And I think every country is dealing with this, like the rise of, I don't know what the word is that people use, but just men and boys being taught that it's okay to treat other people poorly and specifically to treat women poorly.
I think we talked about this even off mic. It's a lot of the Andrew Tate-ism.
Yes.
Sort of like black pill, red pill, sort of, spending a lot of money to become you learn to become a man. Take my man classes, become an alpha male, or whatever the hell it is.
Barf.
I think that was one of the names of the classes, like barf. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what they're calling it.
That's me barfing.
No, but I say that because we've talked actually with younger. When I say young people, I do mean people in high school and stuff. It is for me, this is, and then for people I associate with, it is it's genuinely like a laughable thing. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you pay money for that. You believe in this.
To learn how to be an alpha male or believe in that sort of structure.
And like, you listen to this and you're like, oh, well, he makes good points. I'm like, what are you talking about? But then it is not like that. A lot of the younger, especially young women in Italy, will have basically the experience of like, oh no, it's wildly popular.
Absolutely. I have another statistic for you as an example of that.
Sadly.
So, yeah. In 2023, there was a survey by ISTAT or ESTAT. They have some great information. You can go there, just ISTAT. So 16% of people from like 18 to 29, so young adults, thought that it was acceptable for a man in a relationship with a woman to control her finances, her money, and her social life in general.
Which includes, like you mentioned earlier, phone, social media, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to control everything about her. And you and I were talking off mic about how this is still kind of a thing today, but I mean, until very recently, it was very common that in heterosexual couples, when a woman married a man, she would go live with that man. And often that man lived with his parents. And then her entire life was dependent on him.
Yeah.
And then therefore his family. And it was just this system of control and power, which was really messed up.
And also, if I may, though, this is a totally separate, but very much a real issue in Italy. There's an infantilizing of men to a certain degree.
Yes.
And I say that because a lot of men up to a certain age will live with their parents. And when I say live with their parents, I mean they do everything for this person. And we talked about this, and sometimes it's a good thing because it's like the idea we've talked about before a couple, maybe months and months ago, we talked about this idea that when you have a house, your family's house, it's not your parents' house, it's your family's house. Like everybody in the family it has a right to live there. So I think like in the States, it's like, well, the parents can, well, you're 18, it's time to fly off, find your own nest or whatever. But it's like, no, we've been living in this house for 300 years. This is our house.
Right.
You can't just kick me out of the house because I'm 18 now.
Which in many cases is lovely.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. It's like,
yeah.
It's beautiful. And at the same time, it's like you have like, so somebody turns like a man, for instance, as 20, 25 years old. His parents pay for a lot of the utilities, the groceries. His mom does a lot of the laundry. She does a lot of the cooking. She does a lot of, so it's like you work, you make money to go do fun things with. And then there's an expectation that even when you get married, you'll stay in the house. Not always. And again, this is changing. This is definitely an outdated belief that is changing. Undoubtedly, especially.
But it's still very common.
Remarkably
common. And it's another version of, if you're moving here, this is probably not, you're not going to be the mother in this case, but it's another example of how moms are often, sometimes the women, if you want to choose to take care of your son or your children until they're 40 or whatever it is, and you just love cooking and cleaning and all that, I'm so happy for you. However, there are people who don't want that, who are forced into that situation. So it's just good to acknowledge that exists fervently here.
Yes, no, and the reason I say infantilizing is just the idea that when you finally get married as a man, now your mom isn't going to do it, but your wife is going to do it.
Right.
And it's sort of like, so at what point are you going to figure out how to cook or do dishes or do laundry or do anything resembling taking care of yourself? But you and I think, and I only say that too, and I say that with some aggression, because again, it's this is the sort of Andrew Tateism thing coming back, where it's like, well, you don't need to, and it's like, what are you doing then?
Right.
You living like a shadow life is just like, and I say this too, again, as somebody who's from the outside here, I will say, again, I'm Italian American, but in the sense, mostly 95% American. And it's just like, you have the men who congregate at the bars. You have the men who are always,
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So we were talking to a friend recently and basically talking about how sometimes it can be difficult to make friends as a woman with other women. Did that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
To make girlfriends. Because because a lot of women stay home and a lot of men go out to bars, and that could just mean getting a coffee. It doesn't mean they're all like getting drunk or anything. But there is a culture, especially in small town southern Italy, I will say from experience, that a lot of women don't go out. And even older women will get together, but they get together at each other's houses, which again can be very, very lovely. But if you're a young woman trying to make female friends and other women are taught to just stay at home and not go out, it can be hard to build community.
Especially, and I think, again, this might be very important for those of you who already have children. It is hard when I think a lot of women tend to be like, well, we're moms together, or we're this together, or somehow related by family, or like, or at least we have kids that play together. And when it's not, it's like, no, I have like, other things I enjoy that isn't, but I think that's a difficult thing, because I think the men were always like, they don't connect over their kids. It's like sports teams and whatever,
Work and
yeah, exactly.
weather.
Politics. It's always something. You always can hear them at the bar, like chatting about something, but it's like a lot of times, and my mom, who was invited to some of these women get-togethers, which is like coffee and it's kind of like, we're not allowed to swear. It's like stitch and bitch, but it's like, I don't know if that's swearing technically, but it's kind of like that except there's no stitching involved. It's just, kind of just a fun little chatting. Yeah. But it's sometimes it's like, oh, I think my mom, who is very much not into the whole supporting, like just not into infantilizing men.
Yes.
I think it's a very soft way to
not support the patriarchy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think she's like angry sometimes at these. It's like, oh my God, we cannot define ourselves by other people. Like, are you kidding me right now? So I think that's a big thing.
Speaking of feminists, I want to quickly mention Franca Viola. I say quickly because I could do a whole dissertation and a whole podcast and certainly an episode on this woman, but we're just going to talk about her quickly. So Franca Viola, again, we're still in the trigger warning section, trigger warning for sexual assault and kidnapping, but she's okay. So Franca Viola is 77 years old today. Keep in mind that this woman is alive. She is 77 years old. In 1965, when she was 17 years old, picture it, Sicily, 1965, just keeping it light.
Wasn't a great time for a lot of people.
That was a Golden Girls reference for anybody who didn't get it.
10 out of 10. I did not get it, so I don't know where I'm coming from.
So being serious, because this is very serious. In 1965, she was 17 years old. She was living in Sicily, and she was kidnapped and assaulted by a previous partner of hers. And in that time, it was expected for her to marry her rapist to exonerate her rapist. And in fact, the man who assaulted her called her dad saying, hey, she's with me. We eloped. We're getting married now. And the dad played along, just to let you guys know, the dad played along, but he knew it was not okay. Once he had her back safe, her family fought so hard for her to not have to marry this man and to sue him and to get him put in prison.
Yes.
So he served 10 years in prison.
He died 2 years later. He got murdered.
Yep. Again, we could do a whole podcast on it. As Nathaniel had said,
if I actually I want to toss an edge. You mentioned the word assault. She was raped, by the way. It was just because
yes, I was trying not to use that word too much. She was raped more than once.
Yes, because it's one of those things where I was like, assault. Oh, it's like, okay, maybe.
No, it was really bad. She was kidnapped and raped many, many times. She was kidnapped by several men.
Yes.
The friends of her rapist.
Her and her brother. Her brother was later released, and then she was not. And then this, I think some people, translate it as a shotgun wedding, like sort of a wedding at the point of a shotgun. And they actually did get the police involved, who surprisingly were helpful and did actually help them. And then nobody thought they would win the court case because there's a lot of precedent, but also the fact that they had a previous relationship very slightly beforehand. They were, the guy's name is Melodia, hilariously enough. So he was basically framing it as like, no, we ran away together. It was a love getaway. It was a fun escape.
Which was obviously not true.
No. And
she did not say yes. She said no many, many times.
And I just want it was the first time that successfully a woman was not forced to marry her rapist after, again, going back to, I mentioned earlier, the shame. That's still a big part of, and especially, we've talked about this before. I know I keep saying this, but these things come in context, I guess, in these situations where when we say Sicily is arguably a different country in a lot of contexts, this is one of them where it's, in Milan, this is a different story than in Sicily, where it's a little bit more of a...
However, the laws that were keeping women down were national laws.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Which is just good to acknowledge. It's not like Sicily had its own laws.
No. I just think it more just like, it was still like when you talk about these honor-based sort of systems where it's small family things and you have to do this and you blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, without honor and then you get, excised from the community. It's like, right. I can see in Milan, this would be harder to understand than in a place like, or small town, Southern Italy, essentially, where it is very much a different culture. Absolutely.
Where in 1965, a 17-year-old who was raped and I'm not going to go into it, but that it was somehow supposed to be her responsibility to exonerate her rapist by marrying him.
Yeah.
That was law. That's what you did. So, like Nathaniel said, it's wild how close these things are to us. And it wasn't, so that was in 1965. It wasn't until 1981 that they changed the law so that rapists who married their victims were not exonerated.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
1981. Also in 1981, they changed the criminal code that had to do with basically if a woman was raped or if she chose to have sex, basically they changed it so that if a woman did that, it was okay up until 1981 for a man to kill her because she dishonored her family, according to culture and the law.
Yeah.
So in 1981, they changed that so that if someone did kill that person, that they got more jail time. Before 1981, the person either wasn't prosecuted, or if they were, they only got, I think, 3 to 7 years in jail.
Yeah, seen as understandable sort of
Right,
thing.
exactly. Like, oh, it's fine. She dishonored the family. We get it. That's a quote.
There's also,
I'm not
I
saying
mean,
that.
again, not just, I mean, yeah, I figure we're well past the trigger warning sort of thing, but I think the Francavilla case also helped, if I'm not mistaken, part of the ruling was, and I could be mistaken, it might have been a later ruling, was a woman in a marriage can still be raped by her husband. It's not just now that they're married, all sex is consensual.
Right.
It's like, no. And that was actually, I believe part of their ruling was drawing that line, basically
Okay,
saying,
I didn't know that. That's good to know.
I think so. And that helped a lot. Again, and that I do keep saying this because it's so like to be like, oh my God, I loved Italy. I'm traveling around the 90s. I'm traveling, and I'm like, but like, and again, I say this because so many people have like stories of traveling around Franco era Spain, or I cannot remember the dictator of Portugal, and it's like, it's not that long ago. And some of these laws are not that long ago that they were not just in effect, but actually exercised. Because it's one thing. I mean, the United States is not, I don't think, nearly old enough to have, I mean, kind of, but like have one of those archaic 300-year-old laws that people forgot to ever repeal and just we just stopped doing it. It's like, I don't know, like England has their, witch burning laws, and it's like, oh, right, we didn't repeal that from 1517. Like we should probably do that to be safe. Italy, I think, is one of those places where you're just like, that's not like you forgot. Like you were actively doing that up until like the 80s, which was, again, not a great time for a lot of people.
Right. And speaking of the 80s, we're going to move into the 90s with this next landmark case.
That was a great time for a lot of people.
So sexual violence became a crime against the person, a person, versus a, quote, public morality problem. And do you want to guess what year in the 90s this
It's
changed?
going to be like something ridiculously late, isn't it?
1996.
Nice. All right.
We were alive when
I was
this...
like 1 year old when this happened.
Yes, when this changed from it being a case of crime against a person versus a crime against public morality.
So before it was public morality.
Right.
Okay. Just to be clear. It's
Now
not
it is a
public
crime against... Yes, now it is a crime against a person.
Well, that's a kind of interesting way of going from objectification to finally personification.
Woo.
Yeah.
It is good. Yes, I just
But-
can't woo too much because it's still sad.
Yeah. Still super depressing.
Okay, let's talk about slightly lighter than that, women in the workplace.
Yeah, I think, and I think that pretty much tied up femicide, right? You had all your, I just want to make sure we like kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think if you all are interested in it, we can certainly write articles that go deeper into this. But like I said, it's so hard to find accurate statistics that are backed up, that aren't just kind of higgledy-piggledy, that I didn't want to go too far into that.
And if I may add like three small things, maybe, I promise.
Yeah,
That's it.
please.
One was just simply that with the reason we're doing this is because we do realize that some people, we even have friends who joke about, oh, I'd love to move to Italy and find an Italian man. I'm like, yeah, honestly, 85% of them are good. And I know that also there, and I say this with a love as a man to other men. Anytime somebody's like, well, men do this, there's always that one guy who's like, not all men. It's like, not all men, fine. But oh my God, an overwhelming majority of them. And sometimes that overwhelming majority is 60% or whatever it is. Some of these statistics, like, it's still a lot of you. It's still more than zero. And the reason I mention this is simply because that, if you're coming to Italy, it's like, yeah, you might not realize what you are, if not marrying into, certainly dating into. You're like, oh, there are expectations that you might not understand are there. And hopefully you're moving to Rome, or you're moving to Milan, you're moving to Torino, you're moving to a place that's a little bit more like, okay, it's very much in metropolitan, international. It's got I say westernized, I don't mean Americanized. I just mean like sort of, it's not as archaic. It's not as like sort of honor-based. It's not as sort of like, you keep these things down. You don't talk about these things. And that's a big part of it that, again, I think you will be okay. A lot of times people are okay. I mean, I think just generally, like, especially a lot of, when I say, I don't know, I know that there's weird lines between expat and immigrant, and I know that I know a lot of like people from the UK and Americans prefer to call themselves expats, not immigrants. But the point is,
People who move here?
Yes, people who move. It's like you might stay within a certain community, so you might not be affected by it. Maybe you find somebody's great, and there's like, yeah, I don't agree with what's happening these days. Like, I think,
of course,
we've gotten off track.
It's also important to know, we talk about this a lot, is that if you're moving here with kids, this is not a mentality that is going to greatly change within the next 10 to 15 years. I think it will get better. I think we're going to be talking about these issues more and more, but it's important to remember that this is stuff that your kids will have to have to talk about in school.
I was
have to confront.
Big thing, yeah. If you're bringing kids who are, 10 to 15, especially because that's like probably when you start understanding some of this stuff, it's going to be like, you're going to hear your kids repeat things. You're like, whoa, what are we talking about there?
And they're going to have to deal with it in school, and no matter what their belief system is, they're going to be confronted with it.
And I think slightly related, this is only related slightly to femicide and assault. I just want to say again how this is so, it's a small anecdote, very briefly. It's just, we went to the hardware store once years ago. Usually it was run by a sweet old man. Nice guy. Very helpful. He was like, if you need to find something, he knew where everything was. It's very classic. Oh, I went, this old Italian man would help me find things. And then occasionally his wife was there helping here and there. And I think once we went in and she was like in good spirits, and we were like, oh, blah, blah, blah. How, I basically, in this conversation, we asked how she was doing. And she's like, I'm doing great. My husband's sick, so he can't beat me today. And I think
it was not a joke.
Yeah, I think we're both like, oh, do we laugh? I am not getting the context here. Is this a joke? Because we barely spoke Italian at that point, so it was sort of like, a mix of like Google Translate and trying to figure out what does that mean. And again, we actually talked to a friend, and he was like, that she's
we were
being
confirming.
serious.
We were like, yeah, what was that? A dark comedy?
Is she just like known for her comedy?
Nope.
Yeah.
He's like, nope. That was her being honest.
That was her being honest. And I think, but it's like, again, so like, it's not like people didn't know this was happening. It's not like the cops didn't know this was happening. It's not that people in town didn't know this was happening. This was happening and nobody was stopping it. And but it also became so ingrained that it was just sort of a thing. And it was just like, okay, so can we? And of course now I think that's closed, and I think he's dead, and whatever. But it's still anyway, I wanted to mention that just in the sense of like, it's hard. It's like, again, as a myself, an immigrant, an expat, however you might say, vaguely a permanent tourist, I don't get ingrained in these things. I also don't date a lot of Italian men. I don't think I've dated any Italian men. So
I don't think you have, no.
So there's a lot of my experience is not personal. And it's still, though, I think it's just, you are surrounded by it. And I say that again to the other men who are like, not all men and all this. I'm like, I know. But
of course, but it happens, and it needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be changed.
And you can stand on one of two sides, and it's probably better to stand on the side in which you're not, actively
being a poopy head, to put it lightly, because I want to say something else, but I will not.
So moving on to women in the workplace.
Yes, and this is just going to be a quick section because, if you're moving here, it's good to know some of this information. So, interesting tidbit: 60% of university graduates are women. This is kind of an old statistic, but I think it holds pretty true. This is from 2015. So 60% of university graduates were women, but only 47.8% of those women went on to, let me say that again. 60% of university graduates are women, but the employment rate of women is 47%.
Okay.
So many of the women who went to university did not go on to any career path.
And I not that you have necessarily the information in front of you, does that include, that is just an Italy statistic? It doesn't include,
yes.
So it doesn't include women who actually are employed but left the country?
That's a good point. It does not.
Okay.
That's a good reference point.
Because I also know that even the 60% of women are college graduates are women. I didn't know how many it would include like men who, because a lot of the trade jobs don't necessarily need a college degree. So if it's a lot of like women are finding themselves in like, I don't know, a pharmacist job, for example, versus a construction job or something
quote unquote, like higher education.
Exactly.
That's a good point. Another important thing, this is, I think, very important to know, is that there's a wage gap here between men and women. So women tend to make 20% less than men. But we were talking off mic about this, and do we know what it is in the U.S.?
There used to be this whole statistic, and again, I don't know how old the statistic is, but it used to be like every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 70 cents. So I think that would be like 30% less. I don't know if that's still accurate. I don't know if it's gone up to like 75 or 80 or 85 or down, hopefully not down.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's similar now in between Italy and the States. And I will say too, just in case anybody's thinking about moving here, on average, Europe pays less for their jobs than they do in the States. A lot of it has to do with taxes. Just you're going to get taxed, so you get less anyway. Right. But you get more, like your social net is a lot bigger. The social safety net is a lot bigger in terms of healthcare and things like that, and public transportation, blah, 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 blah.
And also rent and utilities and well, utilities can sometimes be more, but rent and food and living costs can be lower.
Exactly.
So then your wage is lower.
And the reason I mention that is just because it's like if Europe is cheaper, or not cheaper, you get paid less for the same job as you in the States, Italy would be on the lower end of even that scale. So if like a job might pay $115,000 in the States, you might only get like 70 for it in Italy. So I mentioned that too again. It's like if women are getting paid less, it's still, I don't know. I mean, it's still having halving your
Yeah.
your income,
Right.
and also still losing that same percent. So it's not like, well, hey, there's less of a wage discrepancy.
Exactly. So, so we talked about the wage gap, and this is an interesting thing. So, women cannot be fired for being pregnant. However, up until quite recently, I'm going to say the early aughts or late 20th century, I don't have a specific date. There used to be this thing called the dimissione in bianco, I hope I'm saying that right, which is the white resignation, where essentially an employer would make a woman sign a blank resignation letter, and then the employer would date that letter if they found out that the woman ever became pregnant. And so they would just force them to resign.
Yeah.
So there has been, I'm mentioning this because there has been some information in, I don't want to say news, but like tabloid sort of international news or national news, that is still going on. I don't think that's accurate, but I will say it is illegal for anyone to fire you because you are pregnant. If that happens to you, you can absolutely fight it. That is against the law for them to do that.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. We've also mentioned too, just again, on that note, we talked about how much time off they get. I think you get 12 to 18 months. I can't remember exactly. And I know that you are kind of sort of forced to take some of that time before you actually give birth.
Right.
And then you can take the rest
You can't
after.
work up until the day you have the baby.
Exactly. Because they kind of like, no, you should probably be home and, I don't know, resting, put your feet up. I don't know, something that's not working.
Yeah. And this is all to say that it goes back to what we've talked about, that women are often expected to be wives and mothers before they are expected to have their own lives and just have a career and do life however they want to do it. So just some things to mention. Okay, let's move into talking about some healthcare.
Actually, one way to maybe segue into that is the super depressing infant mortality rate, because that is, again, I'm only mentioning that because I would think, I mean, when I move to a country, I feel like I'm curious about things like that, like healthcare and infant mortality rate.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm always super curious about that as someone who might have a child one day.
Well, and I think that's a big thing because anybody coming in, it's like, oh, I might start a family. It's kind of like, wait a second, like how, like what is because we've talked about the healthcare not being great here, I guess, is part of what I wanted to mention. You had some statistics on that. And one of the reasons I want to mention is we've talked about how the healthcare here is free and largely comprehensive, but maybe like in the South, it's a bit,
to be fair, healthcare overall in Italy is some of the best in, I want to say in Europe, in the world. It is very, very good healthcare, but like anywhere, it varies depending on where you are.
Yes. Yeah.
So just to think about that. Okay, so yes, infant mortality rate. So the infant mortality rate here in Italy is trigger warning for infant mortality. 2 babies die per 1,000 live births.
Okay.
Compared to the US, which is 6 babies die per 1,000 live births. Just in case you live somewhere else, that is 4 to 1,000 in the UK. Canada, the same, 4 to 1,000. France, 3 per 1,000. Spain, 3 per 1,000. Slovenia and Croatia. Slovenia is 2 per 1,000 and Croatia is 4 per 1,000. I know that was a lot of numbers, but that's just to say that the infant mortality rate is quite low in Italy. So that is good.
And I will say, of course, that does not, I mean, like when it's just something, obviously, it's hard with statistics like that, especially compared to the United States, because I think the population here is like 65 million. The United States is like 300 million. So it's almost 4 times bigger. Not to mention the fact that I think the birth rates themselves are lower in Italy, just because a lot of people are focused on other things and not necessarily, I mean, it's a little hard. We've talked about, again, the difficulty of actually having a kid in Italy is like, if you don't have a support system, it's going to be hard to have a kid. It's going to be hard to support the kid, especially financially. So this is also, it could be simply a statistic of there are so few births. So when there are births, there are more resources put towards that than there are in other countries. There's also potentially less, like, I don't know, that's just in hospitals versus home births versus birthing centers versus,
I think it should be everywhere, that statistic. Yeah.
Because I didn't know how much of it was like sort of, I don't know. I think sometimes people in the States are terrified of like the $40,000 bill they get from the hospital when they give birth. For sure. So then there's like, how do I do this? Not necessarily even with like a doula, but just how do I do it at home? How do I do it cheaper? And it's like, you can, obviously, like people did that before. That's not impossible. But also, if there's an emergency, you would love somebody on hand that could help with that.
Absolutely. One other thing I want to talk about, because this is, I don't know, it's something that I feels like was a big part of our childhood, like our education, because we had good teachers, was talking about, getting pregnant when you're still a child, essentially. becoming pregnant before under 18.
There was what?
I feel like our teachers talked about that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think they said don't.
Oh no, of course.
Oh, okay.
But they talked to us about it. What I'm saying is some people don't have that experience.
Oh, I think it was
Sometimes
just sex education or whatever it was.
We did, but I'm thinking of one specific teacher who was very concerned about it, and she was like, "I just want to let you guys know there's access to help, and don't let this happen to you." And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I think I missed. I know I was reading a lot through those. I mean, it could be also we did go to school in Georgia.
Right, and that's the thing, because I feel like sex education is often not great. We had pretty decent education, and our teachers cared about us. So sometimes they would be like, "Hey, don't let this happen to you, and you can come to me if you need help."
I was gonna say it was not entirely uncommon, not common, but not uncommon for somebody in 8th grade or 9th grade to be pregnant.
Yes, we did. Also, yeah, we knew a lot of people who became pregnant between like 8th grade and 9th grade.
So that was a fun bit of
So on that note, 3 out of every 1,000 girls between 15 and 19 gave birth in Italy in 2023.
Wow.
So that is
that low or high?
It's pretty low.
Okay.
So in the U.S., it's 13.
Oh my gosh.
13 girls per 1,000 give birth between 15 and 19 in 2023.
Good Lord. Okay. That seems really high.
It is. It's very high. So that's I wanted to mention that it's much lower here.
Because also there are high schools that have 1,000 people in it. So you're just like 13 of you in this high school have or will give birth. That's insane.
It is absolutely insane.
Okay.
Right. So
moving on to some more depressing statistics with Darcy Nathaniel.
Let's talk about some healthcare things. Let's do a bit of the lighter side of healthcare. I mean, it's not that light, but it's not that dark. So, IVF, if you're looking to get pregnant in Italy, IVF is available for heterosexual couples only. That is hard to say. That's not great, but that's how it is. So recently, though, there was a landmark case, right?
At the Supreme Court, basically.
Yes,
Rome.
May 22nd, 2025. So that was last Thursday as we record. There was a ruling saying that same-sex female couples who use IVF abroad can both be recognized as parents in Italy.
Which is all to say, prior to last Thursday, if you are 2 women in a relationship and one of you is planning on giving birth through IVF, only one of you could be on the birth certificate, which, as you kind of assume, just from a general practical standpoint, caused a lot of issues.
Yes.
Just again, on a more of a paperwork, totally practical, not even considering like the idea that, not even sort of, mentally, emotionally going to school and kids are like, you only have one parent or something weird. I don't know. Because that was a big part of their ruling was simply, if two parents or two women, but 2 parents are involved in the raising of a child, why are we breaking up families on paper for no reason? Like what's the intent behind that is essentially their ruling.
Exactly.
So it was, I'm paraphrasing tremendously there. But.
And it's important to know that some regions and some cities were marking 2 female parents. They were acknowledging both of the parents in these couples, but they didn't have to. And a lot of places were not acknowledging both of the parents in these cases. So now they have to. Everywhere has to acknowledge 2 moms. If you have 2 moms, they have to be acknowledged.
And I will say again, we try really to be apolitical, which is super difficult because this is all
very political opinions.
We do, and I think and I'm willing to bet. I honestly don't know the politics of Canada or UK or Australia or any of our other top listening countries off the top of my head, but I do know that in the States, a lot of these things, IVF, as you're going to talk about in a second, the other one,
surrogacy?
Thank you. I'm totally spacing on that. Or a lot, there's all even stuff we've talked about before, femicide, things like that. These become incredibly hotly contested political points, like which side do you stand on, and there's only A and B, when a lot of these unfortunately are quite gray in terms of like levels of different sort of, there's levels to it, I guess, if that makes sense. And I only say that too because we've talked about this before with Italy. They are big on we have a dying or declining birth rate. We have towns that are dying, we have cities that are dying, we have people that are leaving the country, we have a brain drain. And at the same time, when other countries are like France and Germany and a few others are trying to attract American professors and American scientists that have all been fired during that big wave of the federal firing and the federal freezes and stuff like that, and they've put $500 million towards visas and relocation. They're like, this could be, we don't have to pause the research, we could just transfer the research. Italy has not been behind that. anytime there's any sort of like, okay, well, what if we had, a child this way? And like, no, you can't do that. What about this way? You can't do that.
The Italian government only wants children to be had by heterosexual couples who are of Italian blood directly.
Who aren't also do it naturally, like not necessarily. And even like
Exactly.
adoption is, again, anecdotally, and even some of the statistics, it's difficult to have to adopt a child. Like they don't want you. It's like if you're not, and again, that assumes, which is the most silly thing to me, that there'll be no problems at all with the birth. There'll be no problems at all with anything related to it. That you have no economic problems. That you have no, and I think a lot of people, and this happening in the States, obviously, again, not to be political, where people are like, oh, the golden age was like the 50s, or whatever, and it's like, yeah, not for everybody.
For
and
most people,
specifically
it was
not for Italy too. Like really not the golden age for Italy. And for a lot of Italy, at least. And so I think people kind of look at these times. And again, a lot of people saying these things are not necessarily practicing these things, which makes it even more difficult. So it's definitely becoming a bit of a weird. And I think it's, at least you and I were like, oh, because it's a Catholic country. But I will say, for Italy's many flaws, they have a pretty strong division between church and state. Some of that is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we're all Catholic, so it doesn't matter kind of thing. But none of the, at least vocally, like in the States, you'll hear this a lot. It's like, well, because the Bible says X, Y, Z. And it's like, right, but there shouldn't, how does that play into our laws? Because we have a separation of church and state. In Italy, they don't say, well, the Bible says blah, blah, blah. Like, no. It's just about birth rate. It's about nationalism. It's about this. It's about our pride. It's about blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And I think that's just important distinction because we're going to talk about all these difficulties around healthcare and childcare, but instead of addressing these issues, instead they're like that, no. And they like close all these doors. And then it's ended up with like, if you're not in this like kind of
very thin column, then you are not accepted.
Yeah, and then again, they're surprised when people in that column don't have kids because they're like, we don't have jobs, we don't have high paying jobs, we don't have opportunities, we have there's no support as a country. You're giving us nothing. Like, why would we bring a kid into the world in which they're unsupported? Like that's ridiculous.
Yes.
So, just want to throw that out there again in this sort of context of what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing, kind of that we were talking about was same-sex. So the landmark case, same-sex female couples who use IVF abroad can now be recognized both as parents in Italy. Woo! Very excited for that. Hopefully that will have a big effect on the way Italy now addresses all same-sex couples and everything.
And IVF.
And IVF, absolutely. So you still cannot have IVF as a single woman. If you don't have a partner, you can't get IVF.
As in it's legal.
Yeah,
to be clear.
It is illegal. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Surrogacy is not legal in Italy. I just want to repeat these two things because they are wild. Single women cannot have IVF to become a mother, and surrogacy is not legal. I find those two laws absolutely wild.
And I will say, again, I know it's a political thing. There's been a lot of articles in surrogacy. As somebody who had zero opinions in surrogacy, because I don't think I really understood surrogacy for the longest time. I just was like, okay, like we all have surrogate parents, like that's the stand-in parents. Okay, yeah. Really, I know. I know. I just was like, yeah, surrogacy, that seems totally fine. And then there's this Guardian article that was written in a very inflammatory way. It was specifically targeting like celebrities that have that get surrogacy. It was a whole thing. And I was just, and a lot of the comments were like, what are you talking about? This seems like you took the worst idea. Like, and again, I don't want to politicize this at all. And I don't want to get into politics. And I realize, dear listeners, you might have your own opinion of it. I mean, you can feel free to share them with us. But all this is simply to say that it is, I think Italy views it as the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario. They view it as women forced into, like poor women typically forced into giving birth for wealthy parents who don't want to give birth for any number of reasons. As you mentioned, they don't want to get fired from their job. They don't want to take the time off. They want to keep their body in the way that it looks at their, because I think it's a big thing with celebrities. It's like, oh, I can't afford the kid look. I don't know. Right. That's always a big thing. I feel like, I mean, when I looked into this, I got really sad. I feel like I was just like, why can't it just be fun parents that like to step in and I don't know, teach it
because often it is people who want to have children but physically cannot need a surrogate.
Yeah.
So it's sad that that's not a possibility.
And I say that only because I think a lot of what I know, at least in the States, is like you'll see things about like when a couple wants to have a child, it's like I don't know, it's like somebody's sister or somebody who's related is like, oh, I'll be the surrogate.
Right. Often it's done in a very responsible way that is not harmful.
Yeah.
No one's being used.
Exactly. And I think here it is, but I say it too because it's also, again, I don't know what, dear listener, your thoughts are on it. However, it's also not just illegal here, but it's a incredibly hotly contested issue. I mean, like possibly one of the biggest issues in Italy, I had no idea, was surrogacy, to the point of like yelling and blood and spit and thunder. It's just like, wow, y'all care a lot about this. So throwing that out there.
And speaking of ways to create a family, this one I don't have a lot of information on, but I do want to mention it. If you're interested in it, let me know. I can do some more research, put out an article about it. So same-sex couples and adoption. It's a bit complicated, but it seems like a single person from that couple can adopt a foreign child.
It's just an interesting way to make it a two-tiered system.
It is very weird. So only one of you can do it, and you cannot adopt an Italian child. It has to be a foreign child.
And again, there's, as you can imagine, there are all the financial implications involved in that. All that have to be done on that on the single. So even if you're like, well, it's the two of us, it's like, no, it's just the one of you. It is. Everyone who's apparently gone through it has talked about it is like a nightmare of a process.
Right.
And they don't. And again, for a country that's like, we really want to raise bring children and have children and raise children and create children or whatever it is, really don't make it easy.
Right. Absolutely. So moving into just people being people as couples, same-sex civil union was passed in 2016, and that couple would have all the rights of heterosexual marriage except for adoption.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. And that happened very recently, the people being able to have rights, essentially, and be a couple acknowledged by Italy. But interestingly, people have been, I want to say, I don't know that much about it, but it seems like people have been acknowledged for being part of the LGBTQIA community, but not having rights. But it seems like they have been acknowledged for a very long time, maybe longer than in the US, which is interesting. But again, I don't know that much about it. Would love to research it more. So people have been legally allowed to change their gender since 1982.
Which is interesting.
Again, acknowledging people's gender identity for longer than it seems the US has, which is very interesting. And gender affirming care can be covered by the national health system.
Which is fine. I think we've
Meaning they pay for it.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think we've talked about this, and you'll talk about it in a second. But I think the only thing not covered by the national health system, I believe, is dental.
Yeah.
Like emergency dental is, but not like regular checkups and cavities and stuff. And then I think some eye care is not covered. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting thing where those things have to be done privately, and then everything else they're like, yeah, I mean, we'll take care of that. So it's kind of an interesting way of, again, while somebody might disagree on paper, in practice, you can still go through certain, like the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I actually can legally. So thank you.
That makes sense. Absolutely. One thing that I forgot to mention is that divorce has been legal in Italy. Sorry, let me hold up my notes so you can actually hear me. Divorce has been legal in Italy since 1970, but it is still a pretty lengthy process to go through. Off mic, you mentioned, in 2015, 2016?
Somewhere in there, maybe 2009, somewhere in like that, the late aughts to the early 10s, I don't know what we're calling that. There was another, either a law passed or a court case that ruled, because I think up until, like, even in the 70s when they passed it, it was still like you had to go through a trial separation period, which again, as we've talked about, like the difficulty of a woman who was married a man, moved into his family's house, would then often not have a place to go back to, because it'd be like, well, you're gonna go stay with your brother and then your parents and whatever it is.
Especially in an abusive situation, if you're trying to get a divorce, but you're forced to stay with your abuser for a quote unquote like trial separation period, that's incredibly dangerous.
And not to mention, as a lot of these women who have gone through the process have explained, that when you get to a certain age in Italy, the taxes become higher on you. So it is like, for instance, if you're 35, it is more difficult for a company to hire you than if you're 25, because they have to pay slightly higher taxes for you. So a lot of companies will, when they hire somebody, they like to stick with that person and they prefer to hire young. So if you are in the 70s, recently divorced, having to look for a job, there's going to be a very slim chance of finding a job. Not to mention, you cannot get a loan. You cannot you can't get any sort of money from a bank because you have no, and there's no credit history or credit score, credit history really in Italy.
It's very different. We should do maybe an episode on that.
Yeah, you kind of just get somebody to go with you to like vouch for you kind of thing, and they have to have a job, so like they have to have provable income. But again, it's just these difficult things where a lot of these women are like, if I have to show financial like power, it's been 8 or 9 years since my divorce, and this is recent. This is like an article in 2023, and they're like, it's still difficult to show that. everything was linked, everything was combined, and now I'm lost everything. So it's, even though on paper it's I guess this is one of those negative examples. On paper it's one thing, but in practice it's still something else. It's like on paper it's so much easier, no trial separation period, it's a little bit easier, et cetera, and in practice not really. So,
and divorce is hard enough without all that extra stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine, at least.
Okay, so moving into our final section, trigger warning for abortion.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, this is not going to be graphic.
Going to be the least incendiary section. Oh my God.
Again, it's not going to be graphic. We're not going to mention like any specific cases of anything like that, but we're just going to talk about what getting an abortion is.
Well, I guess more the possibility, the access.
The access, that's the word. Okay, so abortion has been legal since 1978 in Italy for people above 18 years and older. It is legal you can get it in the first 90 days of being pregnant. So that's 12 weeks and 6 days. Sometimes depending on what you're reading, it says they're the same number. It just says differently. So you can get an abortion for health, economic, social reasons, and also the circumstances of the conception. So it doesn't have to be affecting your health, this pregnancy. You can get an abortion. It is 100% legal for the first 90 days. After the first 90 days, if you are in danger, if your health is in danger, if the baby's health is in danger, if they are going to not have if they are not going to be able to come to full term, all of those things, you can get an abortion for medical reasons after the first 90 days. Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm trying to do my best to be accurate with this. So getting into some, maybe not restrictions, but kind of restrictions.
Realities.
Also. Thank you. So there is a waiting period of 7 days. Once you go to your doctor and say that you want an abortion, there is a waiting period of 7 days. I don't want to tell my opinion, but I believe that to be problematic. So I've told you my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if that one worked so well.
So there's a waiting period of 7 days unless there is an emergency. If you're having an emergency, your doctor, your gynecologist can do it in that moment. This one is a little bit unclear, but it seems maybe to be up to the discretion of your doctor. Sometimes they will give you counseling once you seek an abortion. They'll counsel you, I don't know, on what your other options are, and probably they can give their own opinion, I guess. So we're going to talk about that in just a second a little bit more. If you are under 18, you need permission from your parents or guardians to get an abortion. However, if they do not give their permission, you can go to a judge, and that judge can give you a ruling on whether you are allowed to have one or not, and they have to make the ruling within 5 days. I do want to make a note of this because we're already talking about abortion. These waiting periods of the 5 days with the judge and not being able to make that choice for yourself, the waiting period of 7 days that you have to do, that is the legal waiting period, that can be an issue because this is a time-based thing. You have to have the abortion within 90 days of your pregnancy. So that waiting period can be detrimental sometimes.
Well, there's the argument that you spent 80-something days trying to figure out how, like, financially, or how to move into a house, or maybe how to get out of a relationship that is abusive, if this is potentially coming from an abusive relationship, or one of 100 things. And I think there's an argument that, like, that 7-day waiting period, if somebody is, because for a lot of people, I'm willing to, I mean, even anecdotally what you found, it's not the first option. It's very much the last option for a lot of people. Right. And so it is literally at the countdown of, because a lot of times you don't even find out you're pregnant until a couple weeks in, minimum, sometimes 4 weeks in if you missed your period or something.
Sometimes, yeah, that's like the earliest maybe.
Yeah, no, so I was thinking, like, it could be, it's not a huge window essentially. And if somebody's like looking for other options,
right,
it can be one of those things where, like, oh, I just missed the window because of that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about conscientious objection. So while abortion is legal in Italy, and I just want to say that it is also covered by the National Health Care Service, so you don't have to pay for this. It is covered. So conscientious objection. Doctors can object to giving you an abortion
if they feel it's morally against their
right. And some sources said that this is something that they have to say ahead of time. Like, you will know, but they can't just kind of willy-nilly choose one day to do it and choose another day to not. They have to, it seems like, put in some paperwork saying their opinion on this.
Which makes sense because also that it prevents it from being, again, this is sort of regardless of the conscious objection, it prevents it from being targeted. You can't be like, for you, I'll do it. For you, I will not do it.
Right, exactly.
Like, I want to punish you or I want to not punish, whatever it is,
right.
you know, it gets weird.
They have to take a stance and sign something ahead of time. So they cannot object if the pregnant person's life is in danger. In my notes, I put a little skeptical on that just because humans will be humans. And I'm guessing that a doctor could make a decision just based on their own morality. But legally, if you are in danger and you're pregnant, they do have to help you.
Yeah. It's sort of like they run the risk of losing their license if they don't. And while that's a total valid, they might run the risk of losing their license. They're okay with that. It's still one of those things where it might take a year or two for that case to actually progress to the point where they can lose their license. So.
Right. Exactly. So conscientious objection is growing in all regions of Italy except the north. That tracks with the way the nationalistic government is going. That sort of, I guess I just want to say it doesn't surprise me. Although we do know a lot of people who are, who wouldn't agree with this, who are on a very liberal leaning. So I don't want to make you feel really sad about that, but it's just a reality.
It also, I don't think that statistic shows if abortion rates themselves are growing or not.
Right. No, abortion rates are staying the same.
Well, I guess I'm curious is if it's conscientious objection could be growing, but if like a town doctors never dealt with it, they never considered the fact they'd have to put in paperwork and like that. And then they realize like, oh, I've never been faced with this.
Yes.
Now I'm going to object to it. And it's like, okay, well, you've now changed that statistic.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you know, it might have...
the objection rates are not changing the abortion statistics. Like people are still getting them at the same rate.
And I was curious if more doctors are either like just doing it to do, I don't know. I'm wondering again, some of these, I only say this too, not to defend these people, but more just a lot of the statistics, it is a difficult word, we have read it's again, I think there's a danger to statistics in general. It can be read in so many different ways. It can mean so many different things, especially without having like, when like somebody's like, oh, it's 10% higher. It's like, yeah, but that's just, 11 people instead of 10 people last year saying, out of 100 saying they disagree. So I'm like, that's only one person made this 10% jump is kind of silly to say 10% because that can seem like such a big number when you're assuming thousands of people or something. So I say that too, and just in this realm of, while it might be rising, it might also be one of those things where there's just now more doctors that perform or more gynecologists, for example, than there ever have been. And now, but also more.
Yeah, there are mitigating factors.
Exactly.
To
Thank
all
you. That's
things,
the one.
yes.
Yeah.
So just to give you a number, since you brought that up, in 2021, which I realize is 4 years ago now, but in 2021, 63% of gynecologists objected to giving abortions.
Okay.
And abortions were only performed in 60% of hospitals, which is not 100%, but it's not terrible. It's more than half. I'm saying that because off mic, Nathaniel and I were talking about how, just like in the States, not all hospitals do everything. Like the hospital near us, I think it wasn't a maternity hospital. There was a specific maternity hospital, but then that hospital closed and it got lumped in. All of those services got lumped in with the hospital an hour away from us.
Which now closed down their maternity ward.
Exactly. That's a whole problem.
But again, going to the thing of like, if you want births, but you're closing down every hospital's maternity ward to it's like 2.5 hours to actually get to a hospital that has a maternity ward, it's a little silly when, especially too, because it's like, it's one thing if like, okay, the person giving birth has to drive 2.5 hours, but then the entire family who wants to come to see it, well, like you're getting like 18 people in a car to go, no, come on.
Also, a birth, it sometimes can take a while.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's an emergency.
Yeah.
So you need access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Speaking of access to healthcare, I will say you do not have to go to a hospital for an abortion, although they are obviously provided there. There are also clinics that you can go to for that. One thing to mention there is that Giorgia Meloni's government and parliament approved legislation in 2024 to give anti-abortionists access to abortion clinics to essentially convince people to not have an abortion. Again, if that's something that you're interested in hearing, please let me know and I can do some more research into this because I could not find specifics about what that means.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested to know.
Because it really kind of feels like it just means like, because I mean, if it's still private space, like if it's a doctor's clinic, for example, they can still kick somebody out. It's their own private practice. They can do whatever they want. I mean, not really, but it's their thing.
I'm thinking of it in the U.S. around like Planned Parenthood or any places where people can access abortion care. Sometimes there will be people outside of that place trying to convince people to not have an abortion. In the U.S., those groups can often tell lies and do things that can be actually quite harmful. I don't know what those groups are like here, and I just want to say that this seems like it's giving certain groups more access to people to convince them to not have an abortion. And I don't know exactly, like you're saying, I don't know where they are in relation to the space. Like you said, in a private practice, a doctor can kick anybody out.
Exactly.
So I don't know exactly what that means.
Is it just in a hospital where they could be in the waiting room? And that's kind of even weirder because then
you're just taking up room in a hospital.
Yeah,
where,
don't do that.
Yeah, where lots of emergencies are happening.
Yeah.
One other thing on this note is just that obviously this is something very much affecting people who need abortions, who need access to abortion care. But it also affects doctors, meaning just that doctors who do choose to give abortions, who do not object to it, are often subject to discrimination by other doctors and just by people in general. And they often have to perform a high number of abortions because other doctors object to it. So people will travel to the places where they can get care, and therefore those doctors have to take on more patients.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is just an important note.
Yeah. One, if I may, I just want to mention about this healthcare thing, because I think we've talked about IVF and we've talked about surrogacy, we've talked about abortion, and especially for women, because if you're a woman anywhere, I feel like, and you go to the doctor, you probably have the experience of not being listened to by your doctor. That seems like, I'm not a woman, but it seems like a very universal experience where a lot of women are like, I went to the doctor, I said I had pain, and they're like, well, probably your period. And you're like, okay, well, it's definitely
probably
not.
in your head.
Yeah, it's like my hand hurts. How is this related? And the reason I mention that is because my mom and I actually we have the same doctor, obviously. She happens to be a gynecologist. So a lot of the primary care physicians, they don't moonlight. How do I explain it? It's like, basically when you come here as a student, if you're moving here, however it is, you have to have a primary doctor. That primary doctor is not just like a GP, as like a general practitioner, as we might have in the States. They are essentially...
They also have like a specialization.
Well, I think almost every doctor only has the specialization. So it's essentially they do two jobs. They do I'll sign the prescriptions that you need to go see a specialist, and also I am the specialist for other things. So it's one of those things like if you need a blood test, or you need an MRI, or you need a CAT scan, or you need an X-ray, you have to still go to your general practitioner, explain what you need, explain like how you feel, and then they will give you a prescription that you then use to sign up to take an appointment somewhere else. The reason I mention this is because our doctor, who we go to if we have an issue, she is a gynecologist as well. So and a reason that's only important because my mom will go as a doctor. And when I go, I have a list of like, here, I need a blood test. I need this. I have this like thing. I want to get this checked out. I want to go there. I need a blah, blah, blah. And she's like, boom, 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 boom. Here you go. Here's your prescriptions. You're good. 5 minutes. High five. You're out of here. When my mom goes, she was in pain for like a year. She like had all these issues. She was having those ailments. And this woman is just like, yeah, well, maybe it's been cold out recently. So maybe it's just cold. And my mom is like,
it's been pretty windy. Maybe the wind is affecting
is like hurting your neck. And it's like, my mom is getting like increasingly apoplectic because she's like, I am in so much pain, and if you tell me it's the wind, I will throw you out of this window. and again, I say gynecologist because it is a lot of these. You think like, oh, I'm finding support. It's another woman doctor. I don't know if I clarify as a woman. It's another woman. It's a woman doctor, so it's like woman to woman. Maybe there's some sort of support. Maybe you will take me seriously. Not always the case. It does also seem anecdotally. One of the biggest issues I do see on this sort of expat subreddit, the I want out, the moving to Italy, whatever it is. A lot of people, and especially important if you have kids, a lot of parents and a lot of women specifically have issues trying to find a doctor they trust. Not because doctors are inherently untrustworthy in Italy, but just because it is a common experience to go to your doctor with an ailment and for them to be like, well, if it still hurts in a week, come back. And it's like, okay, it took me 3 weeks to get this appointment with you.
Right.
I waited 4 hours in the waiting room. I am in pain. If I don't leave here with some semblance of you having done your job, I'm going to burn this place to the ground. Or, maybe something less aggressive, but that is how some of these conversations tend to go. Cause I'm like, and again, it's not, don't come to Italy. And like, these Italians are terrible and the healthcare system is awful. And a lot of people have good like luck when they find another doctor. We happen to be in the case where we live, as we mentioned, It's quite rural. You don't have a huge choice of doctors to choose from. So, you just find the one that has an opening and you go to that person. So I did want to kind of but again, put this in the context of it's not just abortion or IVF or surrogacy. It's really just
general care.
If you need blood tests, if your knee's been hurting, if you have back pain, if you've been having headaches, migraines, if you've been having any sort of issues at all, and you're like, I need to go to my doctor, you go, and then you leave feeling like, did they just insult me? Did they just make me tell me it's
they just neg me?
Yeah.
Gaslight? Is that the word? Yeah.
They gaslighted me into thinking I'm not actually ill. It's not uncommon. And it's actually incredibly common for women, specifically women, to go to, you mentioned clinics. Mm-hmm. I just want to mention, because I think sometimes in America, clinic, it really has this weird, I don't know, connotation. A lot of people say abortion clinic, so it has this almost political connotation. Nobody says, I went to the dental clinic. I went to the dentist. I went to the eye doctor, not the eye clinic. And here, clinic is more used in the everything medical is a clinic. Some things that are not medical is a clinic. It's just, you type in clinic and you get all these it's essentially a private doctor runs a clinic. And the reason I mention that is because it is common for a lot of women to just go private, because when you go private, you can pretty much get anything done for money. Obviously it costs money, not as much as it would in the States, but it's still like $200 for an x-ray or whatever it is. But you can pretty much say, I want this thing. And they're like, I like money. So I'll take that money and I'll give you that thing. The issue, of course, is, and then I'm done with this segment, is just there's not, when you go privately, the chain of, not necessarily command, but the chain of care, I think maybe, is falls flat. Like if you go to get blood test, for example, nobody will then sit with you to explain what your blood test results mean.
Right.
They expect you to Google that. If you get an x-ray, sometimes they'll just hand you your x-ray and you're like, cool, what am I looking at?
Right.
Is that my back? Is that what is that? Is it a bone? So I just want to put that out there. Sometimes they'll do the x-ray and then they expect you to take that to somebody else who will then explain your results to you. And it's like, but you're the x-ray place. You can explain the results to me. Anyway.
And again, all of this wildly differs depending on what region you're in.
100%.
If you're in a more rural area, if you're in a city, all of that. And
also, genuinely, it depends how much, if you are sort of a wealthier immigrant / expat coming here, your experience is going to be different. Generally, it's straight up.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunate for you, I guess.
Yeah,
just
sorry. But I mean, just the separation, what is it?
Well, no, I mean, yes, very much. I just meant, when I say, well, no, I mean, well, yes. And also, I just meant in the States, it's the same thing. If you can afford Cleveland Clinic or Mayo Clinic versus your, I don't know, some backwater thing where they're going to duct tape your arm after you broke, it's a little bit of different quality of care.
Right.
So I just mean in Italy, it's the same thing, just like it is anywhere else. So I think that, essentially, it's great healthcare. Sometimes you have to fight for yourself, basically. It is a experience.
You do have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, it's a big advocating experience, I think.
Yeah. Big advocating vibes.
Yeah.
So I think that's been our episode. That was really good, actually. I think that was pretty concise and full of information. I do just want to shout out a few resources. So, all of these will be linked in the description, but I want to say their names here. So if you're looking for resources for women's health, you can go to Vita di Donna. That's an organization. I think they're based in Rome, but they seem really awesome. If you are looking for information and help and support and you're part of the LGBTQIA community, you can go to Archigay.
Alrighty.
Archigay is the organization. Like we said, I think pretty close to the top of the episode, if you are experiencing abuse or stalking, or if you are in danger, you can obviously call the police, but you can also call 1522. It's a 24-hour violence helpline, and it's free. You can also go to Artemisia Centro di Violenza. I think I said that one wrong, so I'm going to definitely put that whole link in the description. But that is a resource for women and children experiencing violence and abuse, domestic abuse.
Interesting.
Artemisia Centro Anti-Violenza.
Okay, interesting.
Potentially named after Artemisia Gentileschi.
I was going to say that was pretty not subtle.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I found that I really liked, some of the organizations.
And if I may, I just wanted to kind of cap it, not cap, like you cap it, but I meant I did want to reiterate that it is, if you are, basically, this is not everyone's experience. This is hopefully the extreme, never going to happen to you. You're going to have a beautiful under the Tuscan sun life in Italy if you end up moving here. It is more of just, if you want to get really into the Italian culture, if you're I really want to, I don't know, date an Italian man or woman or this or that, I want to kind of just get in the culture. Here's some things. that you might want to be aware of.
Yeah, we really want to prepare you for the worst.
And I think that which sounds terrible because it's like now that you know the worst exists, but I actually, even though this super subtle, small, tiny thing, one of my uncle happened to be like dating or together. I don't know. They're not married, but they're basically married. A woman who's Italian. And he's like, one of the biggest cultural differences I didn't realize that I was missing. And this is somebody who had lived in Spain and traveled around the world, and, you know, was that she was expecting to pay for everything,
She was expecting him to pay for everything?
Like it was just sort of like, and again, and I only say that too, because there's this like, not in a negative way. She was just like, oh, you're supposed to buy dinner and you're supposed to buy this. And he was just like, I should have told you, I'm super broke. I did not make that clear. I thought riding around the bike was like the explanation. I mean, they live in New York City, so I realized the bike thing could be anything, but he wasn't doing the town car. And no, and I only say it too because it's a hard thing where I think you're mentioning too, like the idea of controlling somebody's finances. It's like, you know, on one hand, it can look like, oh, the man pays for everything. On the other hand, it could be like, yeah, but like sometimes they're paying for stuff from her money that they control. So it's not always, anyway, it's just one of those things that can, on one hand, can look like, I say this too, because again, this Andrew Tateism garbage is like, this idea, the idea that men shouldn't have to pay, or whatever it is. It's this whole idea that like men and women only want somebody who pays for everything, and how women are terrible. And I don't know.
It can basically be disguised as chivalry sometimes.
Exactly.
And it's so deeply entrenched that sometimes it seems kind, it seems nice, but it's deeply entrenched in trying to have power over someone.
Yeah. And again, it could have been one of those things that's like, yeah, it's just like you can pay for things because you don't have to pay for anything else in your home life. You can spend all your money like sort of wooing someone, but then it can get really ugly really quickly. And I only wanted to put that in context again because your experiences, especially visiting Italy, is going to be very, very different. It's almost like everyone has a mask on when you're a tourist. It's just this like, welcome to Italy. We're fun and happy and we love being here, and you're going to love being here too. And we all love it here. And then I think when you live here, it's just like, all right, I'm going to stop doing that mask now. I'm just going to be honest.
And I think all the people we know are lovely, wonderful people. And having lived here, we also luckily have like these conversations with people, and they bring up the realities for some people living here. So we just happen to get to know some of the worst side, not through personal experience, but through like tertiary experience, and then through research. So we want to put that out there, so you're not just coming thinking that everything's going to be rainbows and sunshine, which it is a lot of the time, and hopefully that's your experience. But it's good to know what the worst outcome could be.
And again, as you mentioned, if you were coming here with the idea of like, I'd like to start a family, I want to move to Italy, I want to like kind of keep options open, possibilities open. It's again, I think for a lot of people, just because I mentioned like IVF and surrogacy and abortion, it's like a lot of these are not first options or even second options, and it's important to know that your quality of care might be not what you expect, or that you might not even have access, and that's a really important thing. So we hope it doesn't scare anybody away. We hope it doesn't also, we're not intending to inflame any tempers, to be very clear.
Right.
We do try to keep this in a exploratory and explanationary space, a space of explanations rather than or information than sort of incendiary words.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for that episode.
Oof, you're welcome.
That was honestly a week and a half of research trying to make sure that most of it wasn't even used, because it was like
exactly. I couldn't write a dissertation, but I could write a pretty full essay on this at this point. It was kind of rough at certain points. It's a lot of I don't know, sad, dark things, but it's also very important to know, very important to talk about. So I'm glad that I did it.
And thank you all so much for listening. We hope that you
keep listening.
Yeah. I don't know if you enjoyed the episode, but at least you found it somewhat
informative.
Thank you. That's the one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody for listening. If you want to reach out, you can contact us at our contact page on our website, which is onlyabag.com, or on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much.
Tanti abbracci.